Hi, students. This is John Wesley. We want to learn today the sixth poem, The Hollow Crown, written by William Shakespeare. Okay, this poem, The Hollow Crown, is taken from William Shakespeare's work From Richard II. And Shakespeare's play King Richard II, the play is based on true events that occurred towards the end of the 14th century. So it is not an imaginary writing, it is not from any other thing, but it is a true event that happened, that occurred during 14th century, at the end of the 14th century. Richard II was crowned the King of England in the year 1367. He continued to be the British monarch until 1399, when he was deposed by his cousin Henry of Bolingbroke, who crowned himself King Henry IV in the same year. So, King Richard II, he was ruling England for almost 32 years, and at the end of his 32nd year, he was defeated or dethroned by his own cousin, and his name was Henry. And he belonged to Bolingbroke, so Henry of Bolingbroke, and he crowned himself as King Henry IV in the same year, that is 1399. Shakespeare's play is a dramatic rendition of the last 2 years of King Richard II's life. In this brief span of time, he was ousted from his royal position and sent to prison, where he died in captivity. So, this particular play is a dramatic way of presentation of the last 2 years of King Richard's life. Okay, I told you, 1367 to 1399. So what happened in the last 2 years, that has been beautifully dramatized by Shakespeare. And during this small span of time, he was defeated or dethroned from his royal position, and he was sent to prison. And there, King Richard II died in captivity. Okay, this is the background. Okay. The following extracts is set in the coast of Wales. So where did it happen? So in the coast of Wales, King Richard and some of his followers awaited the arrival of the Welsh army of about 10,000 warriors. Okay, so they were expecting their warriors to arrive, but to their shock and surprise, they received the message that the army was not coming to the rescue. So suddenly, to their shock, they heard or received a message saying that the warriors, 10,000 warriors, are not going to come and help. So King Richard, at that point of time, his followers tried to boost their king's courage against the news, only in vain. When Richard came face to face with the reality of his terrible fate, he spoke the following verse, famously known as the Hollow Crown. Speech in theatrical circles. In it, King Richard is reminded of the power of death that overshadows everything else, including the power of rulers, and renders them as powerless and as any commoner at a moment's notice. At this desperate situation, what did King Richard II say? And he is insisting and telling the power of death that overshadows everything else. So no one can stand in front of death. Everyone has to face the death, whether he might be a ruler or a common person. So this beautiful truth has been portrayed beautifully through this poem. Okay. And about the author, William Shakespeare, an English poet and a playwright, is widely regarded as the greatest writer in the English language and the world's preeminent dramatist. He was born and brought up in Stratford upon Avon, Warwickshire. He wrote about 39 plays, 154 sonnets, 2 long narrative poems, and a few other verses. He was often called England's national poet and nicknamed the Bar of Avon. The first publishing of Shakespeare's work is the first folio. Playwright Ben Jonson wrote a preface to this book, including the quote, "Shakespeare is not of an age, but for all time." His plays have been translated to every major living language and are constantly studied and also performed throughout the world. So here is given the date of birth and place of birth and all his work, that he has written 39 plays and 154 sonnets along with 2 long narrative poems, and how he was called as England's national poet and nicknamed like this. And what Ben Jonson quote about Shakespeare is very, very important. Shakespeare doesn't belong to a particular age. Even now we are learning about his work, and we appreciate his way of writing. He's been a great person for all time. He's not for this particular age or that particular age. He belongs to every age of man's life. That means for all time, I can say, for all time. It did not belong only to the 15th century or 16th century. Even in the 20th century, Shakespeare is considered as one of the best playwriters and great writer. Okay, his plays have been translated into every major living language. So, in many languages, his plays are written or translated, and it is commonly or constantly studied and performed throughout the world. Okay, that's all about William Shakespeare. And here we have some meanings which you can go through. Let's move on to the lines of the poem. Let's talk of graves, of worms and epitaphs. Make dust our paper, and with rainy eyes write sorrow on the bosom of the earth. Let's choose. Okay, the first 3 lines. See, have you ever seen a poem beginning with such words? The king is talking about graves. It's a place, it's a cemetery where people are buried. He talks with like that. He talks about the worms, and he talks about epitaphs. Epitaphs are the writing, like this in the cemetery. Short pieces of writing inscribed on tombstones in memory of the dead. And he's taking, he is considering dust as paper. And with rainy eyes write sorrow on the bosom of the earth. So sitting sad is trying to write something or is trying to tell something about very sad thing. And he says, let's choose executors and talk of wills. And yet not so. For what can we bequeath save our deposed bodies to the ground? He's telling, let's choose our executors. Executors are persons who put someone's term of will into effect. When the executors are called, when are they called? You can say that an executor is a lawyer who writes out a will. At the time of death, before a person's death. So executors and wills, these are the words connected to death. Before a person dies, he just writes a will, and that has been executed by a executor. So he's talking of will. In Tamil they say will. And yet not so, for what can we bequeath? So bequeath means pass on something to the next generation by means of a will. But here he says, what can we bequeath? What can we pass on to next generation? That means the king has only deposed bodies. Deposed body means the body that has been thrown out of the kingdom. Deposed bodies to the ground. The powerless body. I have only my body. I do not have anything, because next line he says, our lands, our lives, and all are Bolingbroke's, because everything has been taken by his own cousin. After the King Richard was dethroned, everything belongs to his cousin Bolingbroke, Henry of Bolingbroke. And nothing can we call our own but death. So here he says, according to that situation, he couldn't call anything his own. His kingdom, his everything, his belonging, his possession, everything has been taken over by Henry of Bolingbroke, but only death. And that small model of the barren earth which serves as a paste and cover to our bones, I can claim for myself is a small model. Man is created by dust. Our flesh is made of dust, because when we die, when a person is dead, if he is buried, it becomes dust after some time. If he is burnt, he becomes ashes, ultimately dust. So that dust is the patch that is covering our bones. See how desperate King Richard was to say such lines. So he is stressing on the power of death. On the power of death. He was a king, he was a ruler until then, but suddenly everything changed. That is why King Richard II speaks like this. And nothing can we call our own but death, and that small mod of the barren earth which serves as space and cover to our bones. For God's sake, let us sit upon the ground and tell sad stories of the death of kings. You can see, bones and flesh. What is flesh made of? As I said, it is dust. And King says like this, let us sit upon the ground. Let us see, he used to sit on the throne. Kings are supposed to sit on the throne, but now in a desperate situation, the king sits on the ground and telling not good stories or happy news, but is wanting to tell sad stories. Sad stories of what? Of whom? Of the death of kings. How kings die. He wanted to narrate that in sad story. Also, some have been deposed, some slain in war, some haunted by the ghosts, they have deposed, some poisoned by their wives, some sleeping killed, all murdered. For within the hollow crown that rounds the mortal temples of a king keeps death his court, and there the antic sits, scoffing his state and grinning at his pomp, allowing him a breath, a little seen, to monarchize, be feared, and kill with looks. And he says, how the kings are killed. Some are deposed, that means dethroned, defeated. Some slain in war, that means they are killed in war. Some kings are killed in war. Some kings are haunted by the ghosts. They have deposed. Already they might have killed them. Those spirits come and haunt these living kings. Some poisoned by their own wives. Some kings are killed while they are sleeping. Anyway, by any means, all the kings are dying, all murdered. For within the hollow crown. Why this particular term, hollow crown? It is not a solid crown. Because the rule of a king is temporary. It is hollow. It is not solid. It is not permanent. That rounds the mortal temples of a king. That rounds the mortal temples of a king, keeps death his court. No, mortal temples. Mortal means dying. What is the court of a king? Death is the court of a king. And there the antic sits. Antic means someone who draws attention through silly or funny act. A court jester, someone in the court who takes the attention of everyone, who delights someone, who entertains the people in the palace. Likewise, the death is sitting in the court of a king and scoffing his state, grinning. So, scoffing means making mockery at the king, at the ministers there, grinning, smiling wildly. At his pomp. You can see king with all glory, with sceptre, with crown, sitting on the throne with all glory. But death is laughing at them. Death is laughing at the king, giving some time to live, allowing him a breath, a little scene to monarchize. To monarchize means to rule. Death is giving some time for the kings to rule. Whenever they are trying to express the glory, death sits like a court jester and mocks at the kings. Be feared and kill with looks. No one can escape death. Infusing him with self and vain conceit, as if this flesh which was about our life were brass impregnable, and humor thus comes at the lost with a little pin, bores through his castle wall, and farewell king. Here he says, there is a vain conceit. Vain conceit. There is a false belief or a false thing, as if this flesh that covers our body appears like appears like walls about our life, where brass impregnable, impossible to pass through. We are thinking, that means people are thinking, or the kings are thinking, that they are very safe because they are covered by a wall which is our flesh. But death sits and humor thus. Death comes at last with a little pin. You might be thinking that the king might be sitting in a palace, guarded by soldiers, having protected with so many things. But death comes like a little pin, bores through his castle wall, and kills him, and says farewell. So, king is not exempted from death. A person who can be a king, just because he is a king, he cannot be escaped from death. Though you might be thinking that your flesh is a wall and with a lot of protection you are covered, death comes like a small pin and just passes through the castle wall and says farewell to the king. That means the king also should die. That's why in the last few lines, cover your heads and mock not flesh and blood with solemn reverence. Throw away respect, tradition, form, and ceremonious duty. Here, after knowing the fact that any person is doomed to die, he says like this: mock not flesh and blood. Do not mock us. Do not mock the kings with solemn reverence. People praise King. Hail King, hail King. Raja Varga. People say like that. Throw away respect. Throw away tradition. Throw away form. Throw away ceremonious duty for the kings. For you have but mistook me all this while. You have misunderstood all this time. I live with bread like you. That means even kings feel hungry, feel want. Yes, they also need desires. They also taste grief. They also need friends. They are subjected thus. How can you say to me I am a king when I am also experiencing the same thing as a common man? How can you say to me I am a king? I am not very special for being a king. In front of death, everyone is equal. My power, my throne, my everything what I have as a king is not going to protect me from death. That is what a great truth has been portrayed by the lines that was spoken by King Richard II. That's why the final lesson that we can learn from this poem: no one can escape death. No one can escape death. Hope you all understand. Let's take this truth and live our life meaningfully. God bless.